The greatest voice in American history was sobbing in a dirty dressing room beneath Carnegie Hall, and nobody could make it stop. On the night of April 23, 1962, Judy Garland sat huddled on a torn velvet chair, her famous face streaked with mascara, her hands shaking from pills and terror, while 3,000 people waited upstairs for a concert that would never happen. She had already decided. The comeback was over before it began. The dreams were dead. The yellow brick road ended in a basement dressing room that smelled of mothballs and broken promises. But then Dean Martin knocked on the door. Not the Dean Martin from the nightclub stages or the movie screens. The real Dean, the man who understood that sometimes saving someone's life means teaching them how to remember who they used to be. What happened in that dressing room over the next 45 minutes would transform the most devastating night of Judy Garland's career into the most triumphant. Because when the King of Cool met the Queen of Hearts at her lowest moment, magic happened. Real magic, not the Hollywood kind. Carnegie Hall, on April 23, 1962, was electric with anticipation. The most prestigious concert venue in America was sold out, packed with celebrities, critics, and devoted fans who had paid premium prices to witness what everyone hoped would be Judy Garland's return to greatness. The lobby buzzed with excitement as men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns moved through the ornate corridors like pilgrims approaching a shrine. But beneath the stage, in the labyrinthine basement where performers prepared for their moments of glory, something was dying. Judy Garland, the woman who had sung Over the Rainbow and made the world believe in magic, was having what her doctor would later call a complete nervous breakdown. She hadn't just lost her confidence. She had lost her connection to the voice that had defined her existence for 30 years. The breakdown had been building for weeks. Judy's life in 1962 was a wreckage of failed marriages, financial disasters, and an addiction to prescription drugs that was slowly killing her from the inside. Her last few performances had been disasters, forgotten lyrics, missed cues, audiences walking out before the final song. The press had been brutal, calling her a has-been, a tragic figure clinging to past glory. The Carnegie Hall concert was supposed to be her redemption, her proof that Judy Garland could still move mountains with her voice. Instead, it had become her funeral. To understand why Judy Garland was crying in that basement dressing room, you have to understand what her life had become by April 1962. She was 39 years old, but looked 50. The pills uppers to get through performances, downers to sleep, painkillers to numb the ache of constant disappointment, had ravaged her body and shattered her psyche. She was broke despite having earned millions. She was alone despite being surrounded by managers, agents, and hangers-on who claimed to care about her. Most devastating of all, she had begun to doubt the one thing that had sustained her through every crisis, her voice. For weeks leading up to the Carnegie Hall concert, Judy had been plagued by nightmares of standing on stage and opening her mouth to find nothing but silence. She was terrified that the magic had finally abandoned her, that the gift that had lifted her from a vaudeville childhood to international stardom had been destroyed by the very success it had created. The Carnegie Hall concert was supposed to prove everyone wrong. It was supposed to show the world that Judy Garland was still vital, still powerful, still capable of reaching into people's souls and making them believe in the possibility of transcendence. Instead, as she sat in that dressing room 2 hours before showtime, Judy was convinced it would only confirm what she already suspected. She was finished. "I can't do it," Judy whispered to her assistant, who hovered nervously near the door. "I can't go out there and pretend everything's fine. I can't sing those songs anymore. They don't mean anything. I don't mean anything." The assistant tried to comfort her, but Judy was beyond consolation. She had taken enough pills to numb an elephant, but the fear kept cutting through the pharmaceutical fog like a knife. Every few minutes, another member of her team would knock on the door with updates from upstairs. The house was full. The press was waiting. The Carnegie Hall management was asking when she would be ready for sound check. Each update made Judy cry harder. 20 minutes before curtain, Judy made her decision. She told her assistant to inform the Carnegie Hall management that she was canceling the show. She would pay whatever penalties were required, issue whatever apologies were necessary, but she could not, walk onto that stage and humiliate herself in front of 3,000 people and the entire entertainment industry. That's when Dean Martin arrived. Dean hadn't planned to attend the concert. He was in New York on business, staying at the Plaza Hotel and planning to catch an early flight back to Los Angeles. But something had drawn him to Carnegie Hall that night. Perhaps intuition, Perhaps coincidence, perhaps the invisible threads that connect performers who understand the weight of entertaining others. When he arrived at the venue, the backstage area was in chaos. Word had leaked that Judy was having problems, and everyone from record executives to newspaper columnists was buzzing with rumors about what was happening in the basement. Dean asked to see Judy, but her manager refused. "She's not seeing anyone," he said nervously. "She needs privacy to prepare." Dean looked at the manager with the kind of steady gaze that made smart people reconsider their positions. "She's not preparing," Dean said quietly. "She's falling apart, and if you think privacy is going to save her, you don't know Judy Garland." Dean had known Judy for 15 years, since their early days in Hollywood when she was still married to Vincente Minnelli, and he was still struggling to establish himself as a solo act after his split with Jerry Lewis. They weren't close friends. Their paths crossed occasionally at industry events and recording sessions, but Dean had always recognized something of himself in Judy's eyes. They were both performers who had learned to hide their vulnerability behind carefully constructed personas, both artists who understood that the price of entertaining others was often the sacrifice of your own authenticity. More importantly, Dean understood addiction. He had watched it destroy friends, colleagues, and family members. He knew the difference between someone who was high and someone who was drowning, and everything about the chaos backstage told him that Judy Garland was drowning. Dean didn't ask permission from Judy's manager. He didn't wait for an invitation from her publicist. He simply walked past the various gatekeepers and knocked on Judy's dressing room door with the kind of authority that comes from knowing exactly what needs to be done. "Judy," Dean called through the door, his voice carrying the warmth and confidence that had made him famous. "It's Dean Martin. Open up." The crying stopped. For a moment there was only silence from inside the dressing room. Then Judy's voice, small and broken. "Go away, Dean. I can't see anyone right now." "I'm not anyone," Dean replied. "I'm Dean Martin, and I'm not leaving until we talk." What happened next was a negotiation that lasted nearly 10 minutes, with Dean standing patiently outside the door while Judy alternately pleaded with him to leave and demanded to know why he cared. Finally, worn down by his persistence and touched by his refusal to abandon her, Judy opened the door. The sight that greeted Dean was heartbreaking. Judy Garland, the woman who had made millions of people believe in the power of hope, looked like hope had abandoned her entirely. Her makeup was ruined by tears. Her hair was disheveled. Her hands shook as she clutched a glass of water that was probably half vodka. She looked like a child who had lost everything and everyone she had ever trusted. But Dean Martin didn't see a broken has-been. He saw Judy Garland, the real Judy, not the public version, but the woman underneath who had survived an impossible childhood, created some of the most beautiful music ever recorded, and somehow retained enough humanity to keep caring about whether she could still touch people's hearts. "You look like hell," Dean said, closing the door behind him and settling into the room's only other chair. "Thanks for the pep talk," Judy replied bitterly. "Just what I needed to hear." "I didn't come here to lie to you," Dean said, lighting a cigarette and offering one to Judy. "You want to know what you look like? You look like someone who's forgotten who she is." Judy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I know exactly who I am, Dean. I'm a washed-up singer who can't remember her lyrics, can't hit her high notes, and can't stop taking pills long enough to put together a decent performance. The whole world knows it. Why shouldn't I?" Dean studied Judy's face with the intensity of a doctor examining a patient. He had heard this kind of self-destruction before, from Frank, during his darkest periods, from himself during the lonely years after his divorce. It was the voice of someone who had internalized every criticism, every disappointment, every failure until they became convinced that their worst enemies were right about them. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" Dean asked, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "I see the woman who sang Over the Rainbow at 17 years old, and made me cry the first time I heard it. I see the performer who could command a room full of tough guys and make them feel like children listening to their mother sing them to sleep." "That was a long time ago," Judy whispered. "That was last month at the Copa," Dean replied. "I was there, Judy, third table from the stage. You sang The Man That Got Away, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. You think that was an accident? You think that was nostalgia? That was magic, and magic doesn't just disappear because you're having a rough patch." For the first time since Dean had entered the room, Judy looked directly at him. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something else there, a flicker of curiosity, as if she was trying to understand how he could see something in her that she couldn't see in herself. "I'm scared, Dean," Judy admitted, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared that I've lost it, that whatever made me special is gone, and everyone's going to realize that I'm just a fraud who got lucky for a few years." Dean leaned forward, his expression more serious than Judy had ever seen it. "You want to know about being scared? I wake up every morning terrified that someone's going to figure out that I'm just a kid from Steubenville who got lucky. Every time I walk on stage, there's a voice in my head telling me that tonight's the night I get exposed as a fake." Judy stared at him in disbelief. "That's ridiculous. You're Dean Martin. You're the coolest man in America." "Cool is just another word for scared," Dean said with a wry smile. "The difference between us and regular people isn't that we don't have fear, it's that we've learned to sing while we're terrified." It was a revelation that cut through Judy's despair, like sunlight through storm clouds. She had spent so much time thinking that her fear was evidence of her unworthiness, proof that she didn't deserve to stand on the same stages as truly confident performers. But Dean Martin, the man who seemed incapable of self-doubt, was telling her that fear was part of the job, not a disqualification from it. "But what if I forget the words?" Judy asked, voicing the nightmare that had been haunting her for weeks. "What if I open my mouth and nothing comes out? What if they realize that I'm not the same person who sang in The Wizard of Oz?" Dean stubbed out his cigarette and looked at Judy with the kind of steady confidence that comes from absolute certainty. "Then you'll improvise. You'll make something up. You'll turn the mistake into part of the show. That's what professionals do, Judy. We don't avoid mistakes, we turn them into magic." Dean stood up and began pacing the small dressing room, his energy filling the space like electricity. "You want to know the secret of performing? It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about connecting with the people in front of you and giving them something real, even if it's not what you planned." He stopped pacing and looked directly at Judy. "Those 3,000 people upstairs didn't come to hear a perfect reproduction of your greatest hits. They came to experience Judy Garland, the real woman, not some airbrushed version of your past self. They want to see you struggle, triumph, fail, recover. They want to be reminded that it's possible to survive whatever life throws at you as long as you keep your sense of humor and your capacity for hope." For the first time in hours, Judy stopped crying. She sat quietly, absorbing Dean's words, feeling something shift inside her chest. It wasn't confidence, not yet, but it was something more valuable, the beginning of self-compassion. "What if I'm not strong enough?" Judy asked. "Then you'll find strength you didn't know you had," Dean replied immediately. "That's what the stage does for us, Judy. It doesn't just reveal who we are, it reveals who we can become." Dean walked to the dressing room mirror and gestured for Judy to join him. Together they looked at their reflections, two middle-aged performers who had survived the brutality of show business long enough to understand both its costs and its rewards. "You see that woman?" Dean asked, pointing to Judy's reflection. "She's been through hell and back. She's survived childhood trauma, failed marriages, addiction, financial ruin, and public humiliation, and she's still here. She's still breathing. She's still capable of creating beauty in a world that desperately needs it." Judy studied her reflection as if seeing herself for the first time. The woman in the mirror looked older than she remembered, more fragile, but there was something in her eyes that she had forgotten was there, a spark of defiance, a refusal to surrender, even when surrender seemed like the most logical option. "I don't know if I can be what they want me to be," Judy said softly. "Don't be what they want," Dean said firmly. "Be what you are. Be the woman who understands heartbreak because she's lived it. Be the singer who knows that the most beautiful songs come from the deepest pain. Be Judy Garland, not the fantasy version, but the real woman who has something to say because she's lived through something worth saying." The conversation that followed was unlike any Judy had ever experienced. Dean didn't offer empty encouragement or false promises. Instead, he talked about the craft of performing, the technical aspects of breath control, stage presence, and audience connection that could sustain a performer even when inspiration failed. He shared stories of his own worst performances, moments when everything went wrong and he had to find ways to salvage the evening through sheer professionalism. "The audience doesn't know your personal problems," Dean explained. "They don't know about the pills or the money troubles or the bad reviews. All they know is that they've invested their time and money in the hope that you'll give them something they can't get anywhere else, and that something isn't perfection, it's authenticity." As Dean talked, Judy began to feel something she hadn't experienced in months: curiosity about her own potential. What would happen if she walked onto that stage not as the Judy Garland of legend, but as the Judy Garland of reality? What if she let the audience see her vulnerability, her struggle, her humanity? "I'm still scared," Judy admitted. "Good," Dean said with a grin. "Scared means you care. Scared means it matters. Use the fear, Judy. Let it fuel the performance instead of paralyzing it." With 15 minutes until curtain, Judy made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She would go on stage. She wouldn't try to recreate her past triumphs or live up to impossible expectations. She would simply be present, authentic, and open to whatever happened. "I need to fix my makeup," Judy said, moving toward the mirror with something approaching determination. "No," Dean said, gently stopping her. "Leave it. Let them see that you've been crying. Let them know that this isn't easy for you. That's what will make it real." Dean helped Judy choose her opening song, not one of her signature numbers, but a simple, intimate ballad that would allow her to connect with the audience before attempting anything more challenging. He showed her breathing exercises to calm her nerves and reminded her that every performer in history had faced the same fear she was experiencing. "One more thing," Dean said as they prepared to leave the dressing room. "Remember that you're not performing for the critics or the industry executives. You're performing for the woman in the third row who saved money for months to buy a ticket, for the man in the balcony who's been playing your records since he was a teenager, for the young singer in the cheap seats who dreams of having a career like yours. Those are the people who matter. Those are the people who will carry you through this." When Judy Garland walked onto the Carnegie Hall stage that night, she was a different person than the one who had been crying in the basement an hour earlier. She was still nervous, still fragile, still uncertain about her ability to deliver what the audience expected. But she was no longer alone. She carried with her the wisdom Dean Martin had shared, the reminder that her imperfections were not obstacles to overcome but gifts to embrace. The concert that followed became legendary. Judy sang with a vulnerability and honesty that was more powerful than any technical perfection could have been. When she forgot lyrics, she laughed and made up new ones. When her voice cracked, she acknowledged it and kept singing. When tears ran down her face during Over the Rainbow, she didn't try to hide them. She let them become part of the song. The audience responded with an intensity that surprised everyone, including Judy. They weren't just applauding her performance. They were celebrating her courage, her honesty, her refusal to pretend that life was easier than it actually was. The concert lasted over 2 hours, with multiple standing ovations and encore after encore. It was recorded live and became one of the best-selling albums of Judy's career. But the real victory wasn't the critical acclaim or the commercial success. It was the moment, about halfway through the performance, when Judy realized that she was enjoying herself. For the first time in years, she felt connected to her audience, to her music, and to herself. She remembered why she had fallen in love with performing in the first place, not for the fame or the money, but for the magical exchange of energy between artist and audience that can transform both performer and spectator. Dean Martin watched the entire concert from the wings, never taking his eyes off Judy as she rediscovered her power to move people's hearts. When it was over, when the last encore had been sung and the final standing ovation had died down, Judy found Dean waiting for her backstage with a single rose and a smile that said everything words couldn't express. "Thank you," Judy said, tears streaming down her face, but these were different tears, tears of joy and relief and gratitude. "Thank you," Dean replied. "You reminded me why we do this." The Carnegie Hall concert marked the beginning of a new chapter in Judy Garland's career. She would continue to struggle with addiction and personal problems, but she never again forgot the lesson Dean Martin had taught her that night, that vulnerability was not weakness but strength, that authenticity was more valuable than perfection, and that the greatest performances come from the courage to be fully human in front of other human beings. Years later, when asked about that night, Judy would say that Dean Martin had saved her career. But those who knew both performers understood that the truth was more complex and more beautiful. Dean Martin had reminded Judy Garland who she really was, and in doing so he had given her back the gift that had been there all along, the ability to touch people's hearts simply by being herself. The dressing room beneath Carnegie Hall still exists, though few people who pass through it know about the 45 minutes that changed American music history. But if you listen carefully on quiet nights, when the building is empty and the ghosts of great performances linger in the air, you might hear the echo of a conversation between two artists who understood that sometimes the most important performances happen when no one else is watching, when one broken soul helps another remember how to sing. Dean Martin went to his grave knowing that he had witnessed something miraculous that night, the resurrection of a legend through nothing more complicated than human kindness and professional wisdom. And Judy Garland spent the rest of her career carrying with her the knowledge that no matter how dark things got, there was always someone who believed in the light that could never be extinguished, the light that made her Judy Garland, the greatest voice in American history.